Okay, following this Nordic morning, I'm a bit, well, not surprised, but happy to say that during all this morning we were speaking about sustainability. And our next speaker is Professor Peter Friedman from Mid-Sweden University. I guess, Peter, this is your third time in our university in Valencia, and it will be not the last. And so now you start speaking in Spanish. So thank you for accepting the invitation to be here. And you are going to speak about sports, tourism, and the outdoors. Thank you, Peter.
How do I, or will you? Okay.
I may do it. You may do it, or the colleague from the.
Okay. I will try to multitask and change the slides myself. Okay. You can hear me well in the back? Yeah, good. So thank you very much, Pablo, for inviting me. It's a pleasure, and I always feel very welcome to be here. Yes, to be more specific, the topic of my speech here today will focus on how we can co-create knowledge between academia and practice. And I will take you into different contexts where I've been working with this over the years. Very briefly, my own background, I actually started off studying forestry. I did a PhD in forest economics, looking at the value of recreation if you don't cut down the trees, but rather leave them there for recreational purposes. What is the social value, societal values of that? Those of you who have been in Sweden, you know we have a lot of forest. 60–70% of the land is covered by forest. We have a heavy commercial forest industry, but forests are also used for recreation, especially urban proximate forests. So that took me into this topic of outdoor recreation. And after a visit to Canada, University of British Columbia, where I studied forest recreation more specifically for some time, I returned to Sweden, worked at the Environmental Protection Agency for a few years, also with mountain safety topics. And then I moved up north when there was a tourist research institute established 25 years ago. And I've been focusing on nature-based tourism and outdoor recreation, as well as this Norwegian friluftsliv, outdoor life concept over the last 20 years or so. Primarily doing research in large projects where we have collaborating between academia and the practice. I should also say that I serve on the board of the Swedish Tourist Association or Hiking Association, the STF, as well as the Swedish Association for Outdoor Organizations, which is a national umbrella organization for outdoor activities. So I think also from a personal perspective, I kind of bridge these two worlds of being active both in the practice on a more theoretical strategic basis, as well as academia as a professor. So co-creating solutions for a more sustainable future, I guess you can also add to that. I will take you to 3 cases here. And the first one we will go to will be the national park in Sweden, actually also bordering Norway and extending into Norway, but we will look at the Swedish part of it. And that is how we co-created solutions to reduce crowding, and crowding being when there are too many people at the same time at the same spot, basically. Then we will go to Norway, actually. I have also been working quite a bit in Norway the last 10 years and have an affiliation with the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. And we will look into how we co-created a better understanding of trends in nature-based tourism. And then finally, we will look into a project that I'm working on currently in Sweden, which is about to be finalized, where we look at how we can co-create solutions for more sustainable sport and outdoors, focusing on Sweden, but definitely what we do there can be extended to other parts of the world and Europe for sure. So this is where I will take you the next half hour or so. So first, a few words about co-creation or co-production. If you're really into this, you of course want to make a distinction there, and you can say that co-creation is kind of the process where you're trying to elaborate solutions between different stakeholders, while the co-production is when you take these kind of solutions and put them into use and action. Both the co-creation and co-production perspective has been growing, and the last few decades there's definitely been an increased emphasis that this is one way forward to find solutions to complex problems. And we live in a world that definitely is increasingly complex in many ways. And obviously, the criteria here is that you have several stakeholders involved, not just one homogeneous group of stakeholders. And in my case, and in our case, the cases we will look at, of course, academia will be one obvious, but then also various groups of practitioners, policymakers, and also the public in various ways. And there's been, also this kind of co-creation, co-production has been evolving over time, and maybe starting off more researching with people. And as we'll be moving on, we can see that it's not enough just to do it with people and with other organizations, but we also need to bring in this kind of more fundamental understanding of the different types of knowledge that comes in from these different groups, from academia, from practice. So kind of an epistemological pluralism, you could say. I will also enter the aspect of sustainability, and I think these challenges we have with sustainable recreation, sustainable sports, sustainable tourism, definitely address these kind of more complex situations. And there's been quite a lot of studies done on this topic, and this is one example of a fairly recent study that kind of tried to nail down some of the key principles if you are to be successful in these kind of co-creation, co-production approaches to sustainability in particular, written by a large group of researchers, some of them very prominent in the field, and they address these four aspects that it has to be context-based. You need to put this in a specific context so you all know where you're kind of heading at. It obviously needs to be pluralistic. You can't only do one perspective, you have to include several perspectives. At the same time, it has to be goal-oriented. You need to agree upon what is the goal of the process you're working with. And it has to be interactive. These kind of processes are seldom, going from A to B on a straight line. You have to be able to navigate difficult terrain, and you also need to be adaptive to move a little bit back and forth. So with that said, let's take us to the first challenge or the first case I wanted to bring up here. And that is about crowding, and particularly maybe tied to protected areas. We will come to protected areas soon. I think this slide kind of reflects, we all have been very aware that crowding and too many people out there has become really an issue. Tourism has been growing, and we see these tendencies of anti-tourism, hyper-tourism, over-tourism. And then a few years ago, the COVID pandemic came, and that also in some places really emphasized this, because where you could go into nature, people really went into nature, and it really became an issue. And the issue is not really new, however. The book you can see to the right here on the slide was written in the mid-'80s. And much of this research kind of took off in the North American perspective when the national parks, people got wealthier and had a time and opportunity to visit these national parks in North America, and suddenly they realized this is a problem, that too many people come at the same time, and the experiences from being in nature were kind of being threatened. So maybe nothing new in the bottle, but I think maybe the solutions and the technologies and where we're heading forward could bring some new insights here. As we all know, this concept of crowding falls into the broader aspect of recreation carrying capacity. And again, as a researcher, you often have to work with simplified solutions. But reality is often more complex than that. And of course, this slide kind of gives just a kind of schematic picture of how these kind of relationships may look like, depending on the number of visitors. You may have some places that can handle quite many people up to a certain limit. Other places may be more sensitive just for a few visitors, and there is a large impact there. And of course, you have not only the social dimension connected to crowding, you also have the connection, of course, to environmental values. You also have an economic capacity that you could monitor here. So first of all, of course, you need to know here what is the topic, what is it that you're interested in, and how is the capacity of a certain area with respect to that. In our case, how many other people are there, and what's the perception that people have of the number of other peoples. And added to that, of course, you also need to look at the area as such. No nature area is exactly the same as another. They are all different. Then, of course, depending on what kind of nature type, where it's located, what's the weather, the climate, the number of visitors, the seasonality, and the kind of tourism, the kind of local communities you have there, all these kind of factors will have an impact also on the carrying capacity of a certain area. So this is something you need to take into context. Okay, I added this slide also since we are going to go into a protected area here in a second. This is from a fairly old study in the United States, but I think it's interesting to show, because it shows how the number of visitors in an area changed when you change the name of the area, in this case from a national monument or some other kind of less prominent name up to a national park. Because there are several studies that have shown that when an area becomes a national park, it also triggers tourists to visit the area. It becomes like a signal that this is an area that has special experiences, probably also more accessible, and that brings more people there. And clearly, as you can see, the number of people will go up when you change the name of an area to a national park. And then we will fall down, but it will level off at a higher level. And we measured this in several places in Sweden too, and we could see clearly the same kind of pattern. So as one example, just changing the name of an area may have an impact on the number of visitors, as one perspective to this. Okay, so let's then step up north a bit and take a quick look then here at Fulufjället National Park. And this is one out of 29 national parks in Sweden. National parks in Sweden are all managed by the National Agency for Nature Protection. They are all on government-owned land, and they are kind of considered a more kind of strict protected areas. There are no people living in the national parks, but certainly there could be people living in their surroundings. This park had a special approach to it when it was established in 2002, which makes it an interesting case in terms of co-creation, because when the national agency decided that this is a good area to step up to become a national park. It was a nature reserve before, and they realized there's quite a lot of resistance among the local people living in this region, because there was some hunting and fishing going on in this area, and it was also used quite a bit for local recreation with snowmobiling and other motorized use that didn't really align well with the idea of protecting this area. So they really decided to, rather than do a top-down, a more of a bottom-up process to establish this park. And they divided the park into 4 zones, as you can see here. And these zones had different levels of regulation. And that was one key to find more acceptance of establishing this park. So they did what we consider an inside-out process here. And then they also had a tourism development project in the gateway areas around the parks. Rather than trying to establish tourist facilities in the park, they wanted to establish that outside the park and then using the park as an attraction to these facilities. The zoning approach, and then least, and perhaps from my perspective as a researcher, very important aspect here was that they decided to implement a program for visitor monitoring, to monitor how many people are in this park, what do they think about their visit, how happy are they with the visit, and they did this before and after the park was established. And that is also where me and my team sort of entered the scene here. This is a low alpine area, and it's above the tree line, so then it's considered a mountain in Sweden, but it doesn't have the rugged, dramatic peaks. But what it has the highest waterfall in Sweden, not very high in Norwegian standards, but for Swedes, and quite a few more people think this is a nice spot to visit. You can see it on the right-hand side there. And obviously, to hike to this waterfall was also the hotspot, or is the hotspot in this area. And when I said, okay, we're going to monitor crowding here, and this is 20 years ago, and at that point, that was long before the pandemic, also before we started to talk about hyper-tourism, over-tourism, at least in the Nordic countries. Everyone thought, well, it's a lot of space. It's not crowded, you know. But I know this place is an area where some people think this is too many people. So we did set up this study, and now sorry for maybe a few Swedish words here on this map. But anyway, it's pretty easy to understand. And it's the end of the road. There's a parking lot, and then there is a hike of about 1.5 kilometers from the parking lot to the waterfall. And basically 90% of the people visiting the park will come to this spot and do the hike to the waterfall. So really a hot spot. And it was interesting because part of the establishment of the national park, they decided to extend the trail to this waterfall. So there used to be just one trail going from the parking lot to the waterfall, so people were walking, hiking back and forth. But then they decided to make a loop, so you can make go another way on the way back. So instead of going back and forth, you can make a circular loop and visit the waterfall. And then we were a bit lucky, because when we did this visitor monitoring and we did this questionnaire among visitors here, they closed this new section of the trail for some weeks. So that forced people to go back and forth again, as it used to be in the old days. So we can ask people that both did a round trip and did a back and forth hike here. And it was pretty obvious that this addition of a new trail, giving it a much better flow rather than going back and forth, had a very positive aspect on the number of people that felt crowded. I mean, put it differently, less people felt crowded. Anyway, so the study here then is, the logic here is to monitor the use level. You ask people how many encounters, how many other do they see. You ask them whether they feel crowded. Do you feel, to what degree do you feel that there are too many other people here? And then you also ask them how satisfied were you with the overall visit. And of course, ideally, you like to establish these kind of relationships. And now these graphs are too small to really see, but you can see the relationships here are quite nice from this data. So we monitored, obviously, the number of people, and this was before the time of digitalization, but we had these kind of on-site counters, which are still heavily used in these areas and is definitely still, provides the more precise data than many of these cell phones and apps. And also you need to ask people questions, of course, because just counting is not enough. You also need to ask them, how do they feel about the visit? Did they feel crowded? So that was a questionnaire. And basically we could establish there are nice, interesting relationships between the number of people that we measure with these with equipment, how many other they perceived that they met, if they felt crowded, and how satisfied they were with this trip. So what we can conclude here was that by consulting the people in this area was that, okay, roughly 1/4 of all the visitors here felt crowded to some degree. Of course, it varies. It has an impact on their satisfaction of the visit. So this is an issue that you should care about as a manager of this area. And we could also see that the perceptions of crowding, not the actual number of people, but the perceptions of the number of other people was more important, actually, had a stronger relationship. And based on these graphs and the numbers we found here, we could also advise then the managers of this area that, okay, you should try somehow to manage this area so the number of people, so no one that comes to this hike should not perceive to meet more than 50 other people during their visit. Of course, it is difficult to exactly know, when is the limit, when is the 50, but there is a kind of a rule of thumb for the managers as an indicator of when this hike becomes unsustainable from a crowding and social crowding perspective. So I think this kind of reflects an early example of how you can co-create a solution for more sustainable visitation, in this case, together with the managers and consulting the public in terms of those that visit this area. Okay, so that was my first one. We still have time, don't we, Pablo? Yeah. So the second one, which I think becomes then a little bit more sophisticated in terms of how you co-create solutions. I mean, the first one here, the national park, was pretty standard, I think, straightforward. In this case, it was a project funded by the Norwegian Research Council called Biotur, and it was about how to develop, here's the objective of it, how to develop nature-based tourism primarily from a Norwegian perspective. Norway is really a country that has a lot of potential for nature-based tourism, as well as nature experiences in other contexts, of course. But it was a little bit more commercial oriented. How can we develop economic values based on this, on a sustainable premises that also involves the local communities and sustainable use of the natural resources. An interesting dimension of this project, based on the topic here of co-production, co-creation, is that we had researchers from 5 national academic institutions in Norway. As you can see, I will not mention them all. And then we had 5 international collaborating institutions in Sweden, in Finland, in the European Alps, and in the United States. And then we also had 5 industry partners. We call them industry partners. I wouldn't say it, it's typical the industry, but also, the sector, the outdoor recreation sector, which included, for instance, the Norwegian Trekking Association, the DNT, as well as they're more business-oriented. And the project as such had also covered several aspects of nature-based tourism. So we looked at specific products, we looked at the demand and the market, we looked at the motivations to run tourism businesses, etc. But what I'm going to just show you briefly about is one activity in the first work package here that we call nature-based tourism in the Norwegian context, Norwegian bioeconomy. And part of that was to look at trends in nature-based tourism, because we're all interested in trends, of course, and especially if you talk to the more commercial sector, they like to know, okay, where are we heading? What can the future be, so that they can develop their strategies and know how to kind of design their operations. So we decided to do this in the format of a Delphi study. Some of you may have come across this before. This methodology is not new. It's been around for quite many years, basically since the Second World War, I think, when it was developed to understand, how the enemy kind of were thinking around the strategies, etc. But then this approach has been applied in many other contexts, and also to some extent within tourism. And we basically decided to use this approach, which is based on expert opinions. And we wanted to ask our experts here what the most prominent trends they could see within the nature-based tourism sector, and also to evaluate these trends based on a more commercial perspective, from a business perspective. And so what we did was that we invited 73 experts in 5 different countries to participate in this study. And the whole Delphi approach, you could say, follows very much the idea around co-creating solutions. Because what you do is that you set up these experts. And in this case, as you can see, we had 21 from Norway, 21 from Sweden, 10 from Finland, 10 from the European Alps, primarily in the German-speaking part of the Alps, and then 11 from the western United States, Oregon, Washington region. And by purposely, we also collected these experts from, not only from the core tourism organizations, but also from connecting organizations and sectors like the outdoor industry, outdoor organizations, also youth organizations, etc. And then the Delphi approach means that you do it step by step with these people. So the first step, we just gave them a very open question, asking them to describe these trends that they could see from their perspective in the future. So we got all these kind of trends described in an open-ended format, and then we kind of nailed down the trends that we could identify from these answers, and that was close to 100 different trends, and we kind of merged that. And then we send it back to them and say, okay, these are the trends, the many trends. Please rank them according to how important you think they are. And then they ranked them, and we could then sort them out a bit. And some of them were also pretty close to each other, so we can collapse it a bit. We send it back again and told them, okay, this is how you ranked it last time. This is what all your colleagues say. Would you like to make any changes in your answer? and then we kind of make the possibility to change the answer. So we kind of narrow down a common view among these people. And by doing that kind of interactive process with these 73 experts, and this is, if you kind of summarize the results here to a highly concentrated format, these are the 7 trends that these people consider to be the most significant for the future. And I think they speak for themselves fairly well. I mean, digital trip planning, this digitalization there was very much before and after the trip, more than during the trip, I should say. Guided services, and that people also ask for learning more when they go into nature. A guide provides learning as well as safety, not just showing the way. Authentic experiences, we all know what that could be. Local culture and local products connected to authenticity quite heavily. Health and well-being, responsible travel, and that is very much around the travel to back and forth to the destination. And soft adventure, that is the combination of having the adventure experience, but also sleeping in a nice bed, having a good meal in the evening, kind of. 10 minutes, yeah, that fits me nice, because that takes me, well, if you're interested to learn more about this, I can recommend this book, which kind of summarizes the whole Biotur project. And this Delphi study was just one small part of it. The first 2 chapters here are available free online. You can download them from the publisher. And that takes me to the third and final case or example here of co-creation. And I think this project, Mistra Sport and Outdoors, is completely designed around the idea of co-creating solutions for more sustainable sports and outdoor recreation activities. So it kind of reflects a more in-depth thinking around this idea. So I think these 3 cases kind of take the idea step by step. So Mistra Sport and Outdoors, which I'm leading, it's now doing the final year. We've been working since early 2020. We focus on 6 work packages or themes. And basically, you could say, if I summarize this very quickly, you could say the first theme is about how our organizations function and what's the more mechanism and how knowledge is being transferred into the outdoor and sport organizations to create a mindset about sustainable environmental sustainability. And then we look at transport and mobility. We've been looking at impact on land and water. We're looking at sports equipment and circular behavior, reuse behavior. We're looking at events, and there's a PhD thesis coming up in a couple of weeks. And finally, we're also looking into the policy and behavioral aspects of this. This is huge. It has 40 researchers. We have 50 partner organizations. It's all in Sweden, so it's really should have an impact on the Swedish context that we then can take further from there. We have designed a co-creation process for the entire project that has 4 steps. Step 1 should identify the challenges in each of these 6 areas. What are the main challenges that we want to try to find a solution at? Step 2 is where we try to find these solutions, and step 2 takes, we've been working with that for 2 to 3 years now, doing this kind of co-creation process together, academia, researchers, and representatives from the sport and outdoor sectors. And then step 3 is about to communicate the solutions and then implementing and scaling up in step 4. So that's the idea around this. And just to give you an example here, you are welcome to go to the website to learn much more about where it will end up, and we are still not finished with it. But in the first step, we identify the challenges, and that is something that we did with researchers from the different participating universities and the key organizations in the sport and outdoor sector in Sweden, which you can see on this slide. And we had a structured process identifying what are the key challenges in each of these 6 areas. And several of them entered a multiple set of challenges, of course, to make it more sustainable, environmentally sustainable. This is one example from the work package that focused on impact and land and water, which I thought might be of most interest to you here. So one formulation that we came up with is how we can manage the impact from sport and outdoor recreation on land and water environments in physical planning and management. So how can we work in the planning processes, in the physical planning, which is often done at the municipality level, and or also in protected areas specifically, of course, as we could see the example from the crowding study. So the researchers in this team, they developed a comprehensive model to better understand the different connections that you can see between the physical activity, the outdoor recreation and sports activity, and the benefits and the positive and negative impacts on the environment, as well as the positive and negative impacts from the environment on the human beings being out there. So that framework you can see is summarized to the left here, and it also has different impacts on the individual level, on the local level, regional, national level. And with this kind of comprehensive kind of model, and this learning group, we call them learning groups that worked finding out these solutions, they ended up with a guidebook for sustainable places for sports and outdoor recreation, which you can see to the right on the picture, which now is being tested on 3 different municipalities in Sweden. And having all these meetings within this group, of course, you need to have a lot of fika, you have to have nice cakes, a lot of coffee, in order to end up with this. But this illustrates how we took a comprehensive understanding from the academic literature and took that into a guidebook designed for planners in municipalities, you could say. So this is one example, and this took a couple of years to go, basically, from left to right in this figure. So this is, if you want to know more, I mean, I could speak the rest of the day here from all the other examples. We had 10 learning groups working with figuring out solutions to these kind of challenges, similar challenges as I just showed you. Some of them have been more successful than others, of course. So finally, if I am to kind of conclude here and try to reflect a little bit about, okay, if you are to co-create solutions between academia and practice, there are many things to think of, but I think these 5 points kind of capture some of the important aspects here. First of all, you need to understand this takes time. There was quite a bit of frustration among researchers in this MISTRA program that it took so long. We need to identify the challenges together with the practitioners. Well, we as researchers, we already know what the problem is. But yes, sure we do. But having identified that together put you on the same plate, so to say. And and together with that, it's very important to respect the different competences. You as academics, or we as academics, also have to respect and value the competence that comes in from the practical side here, so we can kind of meet in a good discussion. And we need to have a common understanding of the problem, and that is why it's important to identify the challenge together. Then we understand what the problem is together. It's important to have equal opportunities to participate so that people can do this on their paid time, or they do it as volunteers, but it should be equal opportunities. And then facilitation of the process. And with that, I mean, it benefits a lot if you have a person that has a dedicated task to facilitate such a process that is not one of the stakeholders. It shouldn't be the most distinguished professor in the field that facilitates the process. It should be a neutral person that has the main task to reach the goal of the process. And the professors should contribute with the knowledge to that. So the facilitation of the process is a key to success. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for this inspiring, very inspiring presentation. Now it's time for questions.
Hello. There we go. Thank you. T.A. Loeffler from Eastern Canada. You mentioned and showed the graph, if something gets designated, it instantly becomes more popular, whether that's a formal designation like a national park. In our case, recently we had our rail trail become part of the Great Eastern Divide Bicycle Trail. So whereas no one ever knew about our rail trail, suddenly people are coming because it received that designation by a cycling association. So we also have informal designations that can come out of the blue, as we say in English. So an informal designation could be something like the publication of Eat, Pray, Love, which in the Spanish context brought a lot of people to come to the Camino because the book was published. Cheryl Strayed published a book about the Pacific Coast Trail, and suddenly they had visitation numbers that just went up like a rocket. So my question is, as you said, participatory research can take time. We know that government agencies never move quickly, but sometimes through an informal designation, an area, a tourist area, a place, a park, can suddenly be skyrocketed in terms of visitation. So do you have any advice on how to manage such rapid increase in visitation through, let's say, informal designation?
Yeah. I think you bring up a very good topic here, and I could very well have included that as well. I mean, as you describe, these kind of informal designations, or just, a place becomes very popular on social media because it's very picturesque. Norway has many examples of this. It's Trolltunga rock, for instance, that just rocketed in visitation. And no, I think this is one of the key challenges for us. And I think here, to develop these digital solutions, as we just recently heard about here, I mean, yeah, it's great to put in the rules of protected areas in these apps, but if you can also put in additional information that can guide the visitor on a more adaptive way, I think that could be one way to deal with these rapid changes. But I don't think the technology is yet there, but I think it's heading in that direction.
Thank you. Any other? Peter, I have one question for you because it's very similar to the previous question. In the graphic you show, the best way to preserve a natural area is not to declare it a protected area.
Yeah.
What's your point about?
No, it's a good point. And actually, I mean, I didn't show the whole picture in Sweden. I said we had 29 national parks. And the national parks are, you know, in a way they say this is most valuable nature, but it definitely also being marketed as tourist destinations. And then we have some 3,000, 4,000 nature reserves. And the nature reserve could be anything from a tiny area to huge areas. And it's more flexible format to protect nature. And I know that many of these nature reserves include these kind of more hidden places where they don't want people to come to. So in a way, it's a way to choose the format of the protection. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Omar, that will be the last question. And I will give you some information about the timetable after that.
Yes, based on your question, Pablo, and what Peter said about protected areas, in fact, when we have conservation, when we have management of the protected areas, so they can demarket the destination or the protected area. They can put limits on the number of visitors. I mean, they have all the tools to manage better an area which is not conserved or managed, you know. So what actions are these people who are managing protected areas are taking to manage better the carrying capacity?
Yeah, I think the number one answer to that, of course, is to monitor visitors. And I think where we are now, you need a combination of the more traditional on-site monitoring approaches supplemented with digital monitoring of cell phones, and maybe some of the apps can be useful. However, which I didn't bring up in my presentation, maybe I should have, at least from the Swedish Nordic context, we also have something called the right of public access, which basically say that you as an individual have the right to access all land, even if also private land, as long as you don't harm or disturb any ongoing use of the land. So of course you can't walk on a field that has recently been you know, cultivated or something like that. And of course that causes additional challenges when it comes to manage and regulate visitors, because it's more difficult to ban people or to close an area. So that means you have to work more with soft measures like information, visitor centers, infrastructure. As we can see, if you have a trail and a sign that points there, most people will follow that. So that's also a soft way, but of course that costs money then, as the construction of the trail at this waterfall, which made it very nice to get a loop rather than going back and forth. That costed money, but it reduced the conflict, increased the positive experience.
Okay. Peter, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.